Well met by moonlight, dear ones. I'm Curiosity, and this is my jamboree, a firelit gathering for explorers of the uncanny, the frightening, and the hard to explain. Tonight, we spin tales of a hunter hunted, a bad day for a bird, and the night a house was defended by an archer on the roof. So settle in by the crackling fire, lean in close, sidle up to your buddies for some platonic snuggles, and let's begin. Our first story is from r/Creepy Encounters, posted by Immediate Pirate 727. Before I start, I have to say that my parents and I live in a town in Spain that is surrounded by forests, so it's quite isolated. It's also quite common to go hunting, not only for the simple fact of hunting, but also to prevent animals from reproducing excessively, since the food chain has been broken by the extinction of some predatory species. So the balance is balanced. When my father was younger, he used to go hunting alone, something quite dangerous if you go into the forest, not only because of the animals, and most of the time it was night, so he had to walk back to the car in the dark, lit only by a flashlight that he always carried in his hunting backpack. Nothing had ever happened to him, so he was pretty calm because he knew the area. That day he left home early and took his backpack full of food to spend the day and come home at night. He spent the day walking, but in the end he didn't catch anything and just enjoyed doing some hiking and enjoying nature. So when it was very late and he was tired, he made his way to the car to go home. While he was walking, he heard how they were following him on the right side of the road, but he also heard noises on the left. He discarded the idea that it was a person since that area of the forest was quite far from the town and quite isolated. He hurried to get to the car, although he kept hearing the noise in the darkness of the road he was leaving behind. When he got into the car, the headlight beams illuminated the eyes of at least 10 wolves. So no one was following him. It was a pack of wolves, following their next prey. Given some of the stories we share around here, I don't know if it's better or worse than being followed by a human. Our next story was shared by Money in the Banana Stand. I'm a real estate agent who works and lives in a small town in the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountain. I work alongside my husband at his family-owned agency that's been here since the 70s. We rarely sell homes or represent buyers for homes that are more than an hour outside our area, but occasionally I have an appointment with a client close to the highway that takes one up the mountain. I take the opportunity to drive another 30 minutes towards my favorite scenic mountain overlook. It was a rainy day in May that I needed to assess the progress of a house under construction. The house was only 30 minutes away from this overlook. I decided, after assessing that the house had little to no progress since the last time I drove past it, I would head towards the overlook. There was nothing unusual about this rainy day until I turned left onto the highway leading me to the overlook. Several yards before coming to a stop sign, I noticed a blackbird in the middle of the road that appeared indifferent towards me driving straight for it. The bird's response time was delayed for a clean getaway. I heard its body fly right into the grill of my Ford. Looking in the rearview mirror with a distraught face, I saw that I'd killed it. I'm not a crazily superstitious person, but I do believe in signs, whether positive or negative, that the world provides before events unfold. I told myself, this can't be good. After driving 10 or so minutes up the mountain, the light rain turned into a pour, making the roads slick, fog thick and extremely difficult to drive in. At this point I could feel something telling me to turn back. I felt as though something was off and justified that it was a feeling of guilt for killing that innocent blackbird. I kept driving. 5 minutes passed, and I wasn't far away from the overlook. For the last 25 minutes I'd been driving. Nobody was behind me until now. A small red Tacoma truck that had a porta-john on its bed was tailing my car. I figured I would lose the truck since it would probably continue the highway as I would turn left towards the overlook. To my unfortunate surprise, it followed me and proceeded to inch even closer to my vehicle. I was slightly panicked as the rain poured even harder, and the fog made it that much more difficult to see the road in front of me. 2 minutes away from the overlook, I noticed a white truck with its lights turned on and pulled off the side of the road. The car looked as though it was waiting for someone. But what a peculiar place to wait, since there was nothing there. The red truck is still on my tail, and just as I was sure he would run me off the mountain, I found the overlook to my left, swerved into its parking lot, and let out a sigh of relief. It was short-lived. I looked to my left, and a few yards away, the small red Tacoma truck was also parked at the overlook parking lot. For a few minutes, I sat in my car thinking, maybe he's taking a lunch break, or perhaps he couldn't see anything past the fog and doesn't want a chance driving in these conditions. A few more minutes passed, and the individual driving the red truck opened his door to get outside and, in his arms, held a gun. He was a 5'8", grimy man with black hair, around his mid-40s with a toothpick in his mouth, overalls with a strap hanging off, and a shotgun that would make the bravest of men cower. He was making strides towards my car, but I didn't want to wait for him to reach his destination. I trembled with immense fear, and immediately started my car and headed the direction I came from. The grimy man did not follow me in his small red truck, but the white truck parked off the side of the road from earlier was on my tail, and driving even more recklessly than the man with the shotgun. The rain was lightening up, but the fog lingered longer than I wished it did. He drove on my tail for 10 minutes until I finally lost him in the fog and quickly turned right onto a back road. I was relieved this did not turn into an impasse on the mountain. Well, OP, I hope your beautiful-sounding overlook wasn't ruined for you by that strange day. Our last story was shared by Decent Anywhere 6411. When I was in elementary school, in Canada that's K6, I was an awkward child. I'm autistic, and while my grades were great, my social functioning was lackluster. Still is, if I'm honest. This left me with a fairly small, very colourful group of friends, 2 of the closest being Jessie and Katie. I came from a fairly overprotective household. My mother watched me like a hawk, and thus I was a naive kid. I didn't really understand that a lot of the oddness and dysfunction that would come out of my 2 friends had to do with problems at home. We were never allowed at Katie's house. I think her mum was extremely overweight to the point of hardly being able to move, and she was embarrassed by it. Jessie's house, however, was only a few blocks away from the school. We ended up there a lot. Her parents were divorced and her mum was deaf and mute. My mum and her would communicate through notes when I would go over, and while she at first would always seem slightly erratic, there were no real red flags. When we first started going there, Jessie's mum was living with her boyfriend, as well as her boyfriend's parents. Everyone in the household was deaf with the exception of Jessie and her younger brother, but both of them had limited hearing. I think for the first year or so we were there, the boyfriend's parents kind of kept everything from getting too out of hand, but it was pretty clear it was a dysfunctional household. After they moved out of the household, it was just Jessie's mum and her boyfriend. They would often lock us in the basement when I would spend the night. It was a full apartment, so we saw it as fun freedom, but one time they forgot to lock it, and we walked in on them shoving needles under the table. Again, we were too young to understand, but we did understand that we walked in on something bad. From this point on, we would be designated to spend our sleepover nights in her garage, as it was furnished with carpets and couches. The issue with this was Jessie's mum always kept the door locked, so we wouldn't interfere with her activities again. So when one of us had to use the washroom, we would have to knock on the basement window until Jessie's little brother would hear us and let us through the basement window to pee. Another issue being he was hearing impaired. Thus sometimes it would take a literal hour of absolute banging on that window. We were young, and this felt as close to freedom as you could get. We didn't really understand why, or that it was wrong or dangerous for Jessie's mother to do this, so I never told my mum. It kept going on. One night, we were doing our normal sleepover, playing Pokemon Gold, trading and battling with link cables, and waiting for Jessie's mum to bring out the oven pizza she said she was cooking us, literal hours ago. It was about midnight, no bedtime in that household, and Katie said she really had to pee. She was trying to wait for Jessie's mum to bring in the pizza so she could go through the door, but she couldn't hold it. She goes out by herself to try and rouse Jessie's little brother Aaron. We were expecting it to take her a little while, but to our surprise, she comes back extremely quickly, locking the garage door behind her and latching the lift door. She looks really startled. She tells us that she's knocking to try and get Erin's attention when she heard a rustle from the bush next to the gate, going to the front yard. It takes her a minute to realize what she's looking at, but standing about 5 feet from the gate, 15 feet from the window Katie is at, is a tall man dressed completely in black. She said it seemed like he just appeared out of the darkness, or like he was waiting for something. He asks her if she's managed to lock herself out, while slowly taking a step towards the gate. As she gets up and takes a step back, his pace quickens towards her and she sprints back to the garage. At first, we thought she was just shitting with us. We laughed and told her to stop f***ing around. Then we heard it. Hard twisting of the locked doorknob. Then worse, the sound of scratching metal against the knob. He was trying to pick the lock. We stood in absolute fear for a moment, then grabbed the only pathetic things around we could use to try and defend ourselves. Then it just abruptly stopped. There were no windows in her garage, and no peephole on the door. We couldn't see what was going on. We waited for about 10 minutes, having no idea where the man was, if he was still out there, where her mum was, or where that pizza had got to. But we were like sitting ducks in there. He'd clearly failed to pick the lock, but who knows if or what he would try next. Now this is stupid, but we were stupid, scared children. We grabbed our weapons, which consisted of glorified sticks, and we left that f***ing garage. At first, there was no sign of any man. We moved towards the downstairs window and started slamming on it, screaming and pleading for Erin to open it. Again, that's when we heard it. It was in an almost sing-song, mocking voice that rang out, "Well, hello again." 3 men, all in black. The one in the middle had spoken. They made a move forward. We once again sprinted back to the garage. This time they just straight tried to kick in the door, all 3 of them stomping and kicking. It was close to giving in, and then everything stopped. Jessie's mother had come out the back door, pizza in hand, and startled them. She ran back inside, got her boyfriend and his 2 other friends, users travel in packs, and they were able to chase them off with some actual weapons, I'm guessing. We were still inside the garage, we could honestly just hear it. The adults stayed in the backyard all night, weapons in hand. One person even sat on the f***ing roof with a compound bow. Yup. A compound bow. Night turned to morning and it all settled down. We never stayed at Jessie's house for sleepovers after that. She was put into the care of her grandparents shortly after. It took me a really long time to actually grasp what happened that night, but considering they never called the police, I'm fairly sure we almost got literally murdered over some drug debt Jessie's mother had. Literally can't even imagine the evils that could have gone on that night if fate wasn't on my side. Something tells me those 3 men were way too happy to find children to take as penance, and it would hardly have just been a straightforward murder. Still makes me shudder. The sun is rising, and curious birds are eyeing up our uneaten snacks. The jamboree is at an end once more. My thanks to everyone who sent in stories or gave me permission to narrate theirs. Remember, I upload new stories on Mondays and Fridays, so be sure to subscribe and click the bell icon so you don't miss out. If you have any thoughts about the stories I've narrated, why not leave them in the comments below? And don't forget, if you've enjoyed your time by the fireside, to whittle yourself a like button and give it a click. If you'd like a story of yours narrated, I have a submission form linked in the description, and I would love to learn more of your curious experiences and unexplained happenings. I will see you soon, dear ones, and until then, may your nights be dark and your dreams just a little curious.